Can a single event at age 3 change the trajectory of your entire life? This is Robert Manni, host of Guys TV, and this week my special guest is author Jacob Cooper. We're going to talk about his near-death experience and a lot more right here, right now on Guys TV. You can also catch me on KCAA Radio here in Southern California and Guys Radio, my worldwide podcast. And we're on UK Health Radio all weekend long. Guys TV, Guys Radio, thanks for your support. Okay, Guys Radio, our very special portion of the show where we have a wonderful guest. He's a return guest. He's a Guys guy. And today we're going to talk about near-death experiences, or NDEs. We're going to talk about life. We're going to talk about death. We're going to talk about spirituality, and really not trying to find who you want to be, but really going back to learning about who we really are and being happy with that. The name of my guest, my return guest, is Jacob Cooper. He holds a Master of Social Work. He's a degree licensed clinical social worker, Reiki master, hypnotherapist. He's written 2 books about his near-death experience, and he's got a new one called Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. And he's an amazing guy. He's passionate about promoting healing. He's a best-selling author of his first book, Life After Breath. The new book, again, is Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. He's a sought-after speaker. He's very articulate. He's a young guy, but he really has a lot of wisdom. He's an expert on grief, wisdom, consciousness. He offers meditation and mindfulness seminars to help others find purpose and overcome fear of life and also after death. So welcome back to Guys Radio, Jacob Cooper. How are you, my man?
Robert, an honor to be back on your show. The day has come. Thank you for having me on and all that you do.
All right. Well, good. Thank you. I'm thrilled to have you here. So you say, let's get right to it. I decided to write The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder, believe that we all have a story or a karma. We also have the ability not to be defined by our stories. What is the significance of your new book, Jacob? The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder.
That's a great question. You know, I had my NDE, or near-death experience, which we'll get into, and that's, something that I walked into. It happened. It happened when I was 3 years old. But my real work was making sense of it, processing it, understanding what exactly that experience was and how I could ground it and translate it, into this experience. So the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder, is a teaching book, a guidebook, but also really breaks down the hereafter, lessons from the hereafter, my NDE for the here now, so that we don't have to wait until we die to kind of have awareness of that place where we're going, but we could integrate it in our very lives.
Let's talk about this. You're, just for context, for folks who may not be familiar with your work yet, and I think there's going to be a lot more folks who do get familiar with your work because you do great work, but you had an NDE, near-death experience, and I want you to explain to people what exactly that is, because it was a very brief time when you were 3 years old. You were, I think, climbing up a ladder, and I don't know if you fell or you hit your head, but you were out. And it wasn't a long period of time, but you were on the other side, and on the other side, time is a little bit different, where it might have been 3 to 5 minutes in our time, 3D time. It could have been like an eternity on the other time, because time is not happening on a continuum as we experience it. So put that into context for everybody, exactly what happened. And then I would like you to explain, if you will, how that information that you got from the other side kind of took so long to come out. It seems to be still coming out of you, where you're in your early 30s now, I assume, and this took place when you're 3 years old, yet you are still learning from this experience.
Yeah, no, it's a great 2-part question, Robert. September of 1993, I had something called pertussis, otherwise known as whooping cough, and I wasn't diagnosed with it, but I went to a park in a playground as a very young boy. And, due to this whooping cough, and I actually have a cough right now, but I'm not going to have an NDE on our show. I promise. I'll talk about mine, but God willing, I won't have one. I was climbing a ladder up onto a slide, and I began to just suffocate due to whooping cough, which is very common for infants, children, and some rare cases adults, to happen. And, after suffocating, all parts of my body and my brain, ceased to function. The last part that I was able to remember was my brain, and due to the deprivation of oxygen, I just felt my brain literally snap in half, or like a large crack in half in my brain. And once the saying goes, my brain cracked in half, that's when God came in. And that literally happened to me. And I had this profound NDE, which for those of you unfamiliar with it, was coined by my friend and colleague and inspiration of the term Dr. Imamudi in his book Life After Life. But near-death experiences, you're clinically dead or on the precipice of the body going, but you have this whole other awareness. So there's this mind and brain thing going on where the body and the brain stops working, but this higher mind continues to have awareness. And so for myself in Life After Breath, my first book, I really do chronicle a lot of the classic kind of references of NDEs that many people had that I experienced, which is encounters with my own spirit guides, awareness of, angels that I experienced. I was aware of, it's a limited term, but the best way I could describe it as God, past lives, there was a Jesus awareness. There was awareness of that this life was, not random, that there was a purpose behind it, and I was aware of what I would be doing within this life. So he mentioned that term karma and what this life was about. So it was full blown, incredibly profound. But you make a great reference that, we're used to time here, and our minds have this linear time of the weeks and the months, but when you're there, yes, there is a timelessness, but the timelessness is in a great place of peace where all is well, was well, it will be well is the best way to describe it. You're in this endless place of euphoria where you don't have to do anything to be anything. You already are in this place of ultimate bliss and love and acceptance and just are able to bask it in that place, for
Mhm.
eternity. And it
Now,
was,
you
yes.
were you were 3 at the time, so that's a big experience for anybody. As a 3-year-old, I guess it's a two-sided coin there, where it was an adventure that a 3-year-old would say, "Oh wow, I'm in this special place and there's so much love." But then there is a wisdom that you were given or granted, or that you realized that you had about why we were here, what's going on the other side, that there is another side,
Mhm.
about spirituality, about choices, about your past lives. I mean, these are heavy duty concepts for a 3-year-old. Yet, as a 3-year-old, it could be that you're so open at that time frame that it might be the perfect time to have an NDE. I don't know. How do you, looking back and then
Okay.
putting yourself in that position as a 3-year-old, how did you process that?
I always say two things could be true at the same time. In our world, we just say, you were this and you were that. I think we could be both our human personalities, but underneath that, we have this infinite soul. And so I think for all of us, we have different lifetimes and we experience ourselves as the personality as Robert and, based with the cultural and all the upbringing of it and our chronological age that we're experiencing ourselves in this lifetime. Yeah, but that's just an experience of the soul. That's a journey of the soul in this lifetime. Beyond that is an infinite soul with, infinite degrees of lifetimes and experiences. So sometimes we get caught up with this lifetime as a totality of who we are, but we forget that's an experience. But beyond that, is an infinite soul having these different human experiences through lifetimes. So there, yes, you could be a chronological soul, as a 3-year-old, but then there's also a higher awareness of you on a soul level. So my NDE, I had ways where I would just kind of like go back and forth with my 3-year-old kind of self in a way, but that's on the surface. But beyond that, I was able to see it through the, seat of my soul, the eyes of my soul, really, through the depths of my being. Um, but once I really fully transitioned and crossed over, it was like a full soul experience, and it wasn't just my 3-year-old self having this. But what I'll say is there's an external portrayal of what the world sees us when we're very young and infants, which is a very limiting accumulation of reality. Just because kids can't articulate what's happening doesn't mean on some level they're not processing, things, or they're not kind of thinking things through. It's kind of like a guitar player getting used to its instrument when we come here in the body and being able to have things line up and sped up with each other, within time.
It's interesting. I have a 9-year-old, and he's a 9-year-old, and we have talks, and we were practicing baseball right before our interview, and something happened to him. I picked him up at school, and there was a little something that went on, and I talked to him, but instead of my talking to him like father to son, I did my best based on being reminded through your wonderful book, The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder, about we need to be able to talk to kids as adults. I don't mean like adult, but with the respect that they are sentient beings just like us. They're just,
Right.
they're still just getting the ground under them. They're getting more and more comfortable. And who knows how many lives they've had or not had. I mean, this could be their first time in a human body. We don't know.
Right.
We don't know, but it was
Right.
such great teaching. So how did you get that? That's a wonderful insight that you get, that the way to deal with kids really is really treat them with respect and give them a lot more credit than many times we do, because it's so easy, because kids do crazy stuff, and it's so easy to wag the finger at them.
Yeah, I mean, I think we just kind of look at them with our physical eyes. The degree of understanding comes from your vantage point. When you're coming from, your physical eyes and you're coming from our minds, we could only see things from that vantage point. But when you're coming from a deeper part of you, you could expand what you can see. And so I think when you come from your inner being, you could have transparency as not just, okay, this kid is my son, 9-year-old is experiencing that, but you could start to see their souls, not just, their bodies are just kind of themselves in this limited kind of developmental trajectory, in this life. But beyond that, there's a you beyond the you in a way. There's a
Mm-hmm.
world beyond this world.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so there's something beyond what meets the eye. So I think it really has to do with depth. And the deeper we are, the more that we connect to, the more we could see.
Okay.
Um, you know, but I think really it's trying to like train yourselves to look up at kids and not down at kids.
Mhm. No, I
Oh,
gotta tell you, it's a great book. My special guest, Jacob Cooper, the name of his book, the new one, is The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. Here, let me read you some of the chapter names. You'll really get a sense as to what this book is really all about. Because again, Jacob had an NDE at age 3, and he wrote a book about that. Now he's really, to me, blossoming as a spiritual messenger and teacher. And his new book, The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder, has chapters like Re-Remembering Your Nature, the illusion of loneliness, the individual and the collective, the light at the end of the ladder, transforming grief to knowing, uncovering your superpowers, life, afterlife. There's a lot of big themes here, and it's a really book. It's a book that can really help people. So thank you so much again for being here, Jacob. Let's talk a little bit about grief. One of the themes through your new book is grief comes across quite often because you lost some relatives, your grandmother, I believe, recently,
lost a grandmother and my best friend.
and your best friend, and
Yeah,
that obviously we're in the 3D world, and we believe
uh,
that we keep going, but still it hurts. So tell us how you as an individual, Jacob, deal with grief, and how from a bigger perspective we need to begin to attempt to look at it, to see that death is not the end. It actually is it's a step on the journey.
yeah. Well, I think belief could work very well with grief. Belief in something else. I think, a major hopeful takeaway from, the wisdom of Jacob's ladder is to start to see maybe your loved one as not 6 feet under the ground, but maybe as someone who's continuing on their journey. And if you're able to have, that perspective, it could help. But just because you know that there's a life after their death doesn't mean that you'll have a life after their, a life after their death for yourself. So I think we have to find ways to have a life after their death too within our life. Um, but I think it's important for people to be able to have two realities coexist. As I said, two things could be true. You could believe in and know the afterlife, but you could also be human and have human moments and grieve. And it's important to not judge yourself or to you just kind of say, "Oh my God, I'm so spiritual, but I'm hurting." Not at all. Grief could be a great gateway for compassion, for empathy, for understanding others with loss. And it could also be transformative. Um, I think with grief, I think a big takeaway that I get from it is, I listened to David Kessler from the Kubler-Ross, the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross Foundation, who I mentioned in my book. But David emphasizes that grief is like a river, that it's important to not resist it or to try not to judge it, but to understand that it's kind of like hardwired in our DNA. We've come from thousands of generations of loss and people who came before us, but just to allow that river to flow organically and not to resist it, and it will be able to transform, agony and suffering into potential meaning and love. But we have to allow it to unfold, as well as utilize some helpful supportive systems that will not make our grief worse, but to be able to help us process it and understand it without judgment. So.
What do you think that the passing of your friend taught you, and do you think it was something as part of your karma or your journey to of learning, or was it in your take as a human being, or was it a random thing that you're going to learn from it because it's just something that happened? How do you take the loss of a very close friend like that?
I think there's always a seesaw, from our end and their end in terms of learning. Learning never stops, whether you're here or there. Uh, at least to me, it was, when it's someone's time, it's not something that we could control. We could try to influence it, but people, much like when I had my NDE, I understood that we don't belong to this world. This is a temporary experience, and we're spiritual beings, so we belong to a much higher intelligence, and everything is within rhyme and purpose. It may not make sense to us here now, but we belong to such a greater intelligence. So I think it's really trusting that we want to hold them, we want them to be here, but there's reasonings for timing within passing, despite the untimeliness of it, despite us wanting to hold on to them. We're forever connected to them, but we don't own them.
Mhm.
They really, we all belong to a higher place, and we're here, just as tourists in this human experience.
Now, Jacob, you mentioned kind of you keeping in touch with people, those who have passed. That it's not a crazy, wild ass thing to think of that, but we can actually reach out and through our hearts really feel them and communicate with them, and they're available to us. Tell us how that works, because for a lot of people, they're like, well, they're gone, and I'm hurting, and I don't want to fool myself. How does that work for you, and how should it work
Wh-
for folks out there? What do they
I
need to
think
consider?
I think what's important is to be very gentle with it. A lot of people try to force, connection with the spirit realm, and part of that is just how we're hardwired, like to have this grand experience. It's like you need to like tent yourself or do something kind of crazy. And that's not the case. I think it's really very gentle, very loving, and it's very soft, but I think it's paying attention with curiosity and being very mindful of things and just kind of being in flow and not trying to force it, but allow it to come to you. So it's very fluid, and it's really about receiving, not about self-inducing or creating, something. But I think if we are paying attention in the right way and not trying to force it, you'll find undeniable signs and symbols in connection, with that loved one. I know I certainly have, from seeing their name and just kind of things that I just know that they would send me specifically. So being the more we pay attention, the more that we could really see and experience.
I want you to, this is a little bit off track of the book, but you are a spiritual teacher now, and I want to know about this. To me, gratitude has changed my life. Once I kind of hardwired gratitude into, I wake up every morning, and maybe it's because I'm a little bit older now. I say, thank you for this, and this. And it feels like it's the same as finishing up my workout and doing my push-ups or whatever. I've got to say, and I'm not doing it on purpose. It's not something I'm being forced to do, but I am truly full of appreciation for just being able to be here and present right now. How has gratitude changed your life? What do our listeners need to know about the importance of gratitude?
There's a great saying by the spiritual teacher Zig Ziglar that
Mm-hmm.
says gratitude, not aptitude, will define your altitude. And I love that, because in a sense, um, you know, sometimes in our world we kind of focus on something that we need to have in order to be. We need to do something in order to be something. And I think that has nothing to do with happiness. That has nothing to do with our state of consciousness. Our state of consciousness is really appreciating life within life itself, and being able to transform ourselves, to see the beauty in it all. This is the way of thinking and acting like God in a way, where we're seeing the beauty past the surface. And so this is a real kind of tenet in my book where a lot of people want to go to heaven as a destination, not seeing that it's something that you could experience in this moment. So gratitude is an excellent way to really amplify your consciousness and to really experience life through a whole new gear. Um, I think life should be also about curiosity. Just because we tried a certain gear of life or seeing things in life through a certain way, what's the point of entering tomorrow if we can't try a different gear and to just kind of play with it and test with it? And you'll find through kind of this, playfulness and testing other gears, your experiences on this world could be profound. And it could be one planet that we're living on, but it could be feel like literally a whole new planet. But attitude and gratitude is everything. You could take everything from anyone, and all the spiritual masters understand this. But attitude is where our real freedom lies within, and that's between our two ears and our choices of what we decide to focus on, what we decide to experience. That's reality.
Mhm. And I don't mean to, minimize or marginalize anybody's, pain or the challenges they have on a day-to-day basis. We all have problems, and some people have a lot more problems than other people, but there's always, if you go deep down, there's always something that we can be grateful for.
Absolutely. And my book was, and I'm Jewish, my book was released on Holocaust Remembrance Day. I didn't even try. But when I think of Holocaust Remembrance Day, I think of one man who changed modern day psychology and the way that people look at the world is Dr. Viktor E. Frankl, a Holocaust survivor. And he he was, stripped of everything. Everything was taken from him when he was in the concentration camps, but he found the most freedom in his ability to choose his attitude, his focus, and he understood that life is very much from an inside out. So there's people who have everything who have nothing, and people who have nothing who have everything.
Mhm.
And the format is a possibility from people before us.
Yeah, you mentioned an interesting point. We should touch on it because you're Jewish and you've discovered the Christ consciousness. Now, we all know that Jesus was Jewish and Jesus didn't know what Christianity was. So let's get real, everybody. So you've been able to realize that the consciousness, not the person himself, Yeshua, but the Christ consciousness that we all share is really what it's all about. How did you go through the process of processing that and dealing with that as a Jew?
I mean, honestly, it's just funny
And
the way that Jesus is looked as a Jew, because he's probably more Jewish than any Jew out there. He's right from Israel, and and I kind of see him as like a socialistic reform rabbi, if anything. Um, eh, and what was he saying wasn't radical. I think some of the ideas, through the Crusades and other things were taken in the absolute wrong context, and so I can understand some of their points, but it comes back to the point that I was making where it's like, all right, you have me in front of you, but beyond you there's this consciousness, and that goes far beyond the representation of yourself, in this body, in this human form. So for myself, I never really got into the religion element of it. What separates spirituality and religion is spirituality is more of like a collective set, organized belief system, but spirituality is very personal. It's very personal, and that's your relationship with that energy, with God, with ascended masters. So for me, I wasn't like into the whole theatrics of it all and display of it. And I think for some people that's great. It was more like very just personalized and something that I had with me. So I had a very different perception than the religion of it, the religious side of it, as to me, it was something very close to heart and personal. It wasn't something
Mhm.
externalized or something that I needed VIP or something that I would be angry about if someone had a different belief. It was something innately inside of me, not outside of me.
Well stated. I asked the question with all respect to all religions, but religions are always about. It seems to be about us or them, or there's so much divisiveness a lot
Yeah.
of times with religions. And if you look at all the religions around the world, you could argue that they're all kind of saying the same things, but in different, everybody's in kind of a different tribe or camp or whatever.
Right.
So let's like, why do we have to get all organized like that? So anyhow, when you were in your near death experience, you talked about understanding what happened in your previous incarnations. I believe you had a suicide, and you also discussed with your guides kind of a pre-life preparation. Now, those are heavy duty concepts for the 3-year-old, but I guess your higher self was involved in that. How did that all work out? And when did you begin to, when you were back after the experience, when did you begin to process that? And are you still now processing things from that near-death experience, Jacob?
Yes, every day, so the series of events was the narrative of the events, but the meaning, the substance that I have grows with every day as I practice this awareness, as I practice looking at things through a deeper lens and allowing it to come to me. This way, for me, I don't have to go to heaven. I already embody it by remembering it. And so my NDE is no different than anyone listening, where we come from the other side, we're forever connected to it. Speaking of Jesus himself, he said the kingdom is within. It's not outside of us, thousands of miles away. It's right within us. So we don't we could remember it, we could connect to it, and we could always find ways to integrate it. Um, with my NDE, there was a clear recollection, not just in my NDE, but subsequently throughout my childhood years and teenage years, where I just get these glimpses and memories of past lives, and these dreams and this constant vision of this life between life that I had. It's kind of interesting though. I wasn't going around labeling it, you're identifying it. It was just kind of like this weird but annoying thing at the same time, or just kind of wanted to push it away and be a kid, but all this stuff would just come to me, just
Sure.
kind of be more of it's a little bit like Matt Damon in The Hereafter with his intuitive gifts. Like I just wanted to just like push it away and play sports, and because to survive, I needed to kind of push this away, but later in life to thrive, I needed to make sense of it all. I needed to own it. I couldn't come to a point where I could run or hide from it anymore. But my last life, in which I, had death by suicide, and use the term death because there's, in our world we say commit. I say you don't commit cancer, you don't commit a heart attack. It's mental illness is no different than physical illness to me. It's not a weakness, not a succumb, but it's just, a struggle that takes a lot of strength to cope with on a daily basis. But I really, for me at least, I understood how the NDE in that last lifetime, which I, had a death by suicide, was so intertwined. Um, in a sense, like my back was against the wall in that last lifetime, and I saw no hope out of a situation. And I made a decision. Flash forward to my NDE, I was just suffocated. I saw no life. I was at the abyss of any possible sensation that you could have in suffocating, and then I decided to surrender to something else, this deep power that was always inside of me, that always around me. So there's, at times we could be out of breath, we could be out of sorts, and life could suffocate us, but then there's a breath of eternity, and that's who we are. And
Mhm.
so there's ability to rise out of the ashes, and I certainly am proof of having an NDE. But I think you look at any transformative teacher or being that had some degree of that moment, and instead of running away from it, they went right into it, and they were found themselves really much awakened.
Mhm.
So
So,
light, yeah.
so did you find that, and because a lot of people say, oh, if you take your life, then you kind of punished on the other side. And you, from your experience, that was not the case. It was about, and your perspective seems to be, you should really congratulate those people for having been able to deal with the pain for the amount of time that they had to deal with it while they were on this 3D, experience. Talk to us about that,
Uh,
because people, a lot of people have they don't really take the time to process what suicide is all about and the
right,
pain that people, for somebody to take their life, they're in great pain, and I don't think enough
yeah,
people acknowledge that part of it. They just see the act itself.
right. I think God's not an abusive sociopath. I'd like to think, at least, God is not an abusive, sociopathic, narcissistic, parent that we may have had, or court judge, or cop, or principal. It's so far beyond this realm, but we kind of project our prior experiences of authority, onto God. But what all-loving God would kick someone when they're at their very lowest? It makes no sense. Um, I see myself as living proof that there's no purgatory, from my experience. If anything, it was incredibly healing, and something that I was able to obviously move on from. Life doesn't stop at death. It doesn't stop at, suicide. There are lessons we go through. We are infinite eternal beings. And so no matter what happens, we have opportunity. It's a school. It's not a death sentence where you make one bad choice and then that's it. There's opportunity. Doesn't mean that there's not an ability to have some difficulty, or to learn from it. I do believe from completion we begin, but it's depending on how you see it. You could see that as a victimized, kind of viewpoint, or you could see that as an opportunity. So like we said, it's our attitudes are really everything, and it's like which one we choose will become our experience. But that attitude of gratitude, which and again, we could have our human moments. Of course, we flip the bird, we get upset, but then we are able to pivot to a reality that we know is true,
Okay.
that lasts. And beauty lasts. These painful moments of life come and go, and they're often doorways to get to that beauty.
Okay, my very special guest on Guys Radio. Welcome back, Jacob Cooper. The name of the book is The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. It's a terrific read. It's one of those books where I couldn't just breeze through it to get ready for the show. I read the whole book, and I'm so glad I did, because it was terrific. And there's a lot of big concepts that are in there that are important. And there's some solutions too. So one of the things that you really believe in, as I do, Jacob, is the power of meditation and the importance of going in. It seems like if we want to change the world, and I know it's like a hackneyed old expression, but you've got to go within to change everything on the outside. And it seems like for some people, oh, you're just thinking about yourself. But if you don't make yourself better, if you don't try to get in touch with the God that's within, how are otherwise you're just reacting over and over again to all that stuff that's going on the outside. Talk to us about meditation and the power and importance of going inside to heal.
Yeah. I think when you see yourself as a body, we understand how to take care of the body. There's a respect. You brush your teeth, you use mouthwash, you do everything. But once you understand that you have a soul, there's a great power and a great responsibility. So much like a cell phone, we charge a cell phone, we have these cell phones that are connected to realities far beyond this one. And so when you're able to really connect to your inner being, you're connecting to the real you, the you beyond the thought energy, the emotion energy, just this pure loving place. And when you connect to that place, you could see the world through this lens. And this is the word, I call it the God lens, that part of you that's really able to see thing at the greater depths. So there's a saying, the quieter you become, the more you could hear. And
Mm-hmm.
so meditation isn't fighting the mind. The mind will kind of do its thing, or fighting our thoughts, but it's going beyond the surface of the water into the depths where we could see clearer, and it is a practice. And so you could sit in a chair and meditate, or you could really practice everyday meditation, which to me is mindfulness, which is carrying that awareness in your everyday life and living with awareness, focus, but most importantly, empathy, compassion, and grace and wisdom with the world that you encounter.
Just so folks know, there's some very, and I love this, there's some simple meditations in the book that anybody can do. It's not, because so many people say, I can't stop my mind, there's so much going on, I've got all the monkey chatter, and we all understand that. You
Right.
just start slowly. And Jacob gives us a couple of really easy to do meditations to get inside, to kind of quiet down. And also just even getting out in nature is something that people often overlook, particularly if we live in big cities and stuff. As I know from living in New York City and Manhattan for 30 years, I would step into Central Park and everything would change. And just because it's the lungs of the city, and the energy was so different, and it's so important that it's there. I'm so glad that they developed that. And it's just, I think New York really needs a respite, and it's a great place, and it's still a great place, but nature itself is so healing. Let me ask you something else, Jacob, about another concept in the book that I think is so important is surrender. You talk about the power of surrender and how important it is. A lot of people think of surrender as, well, that's a weakness, I'm giving up. But surrender actually is more of an acknowledgement. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Robert. To me, I work as a therapist, full-time as a psychotherapist with a background in recovery orientation. And, surrender is a big part of being a client, whether that's mental health or recovery orientation. Surrendering doesn't means in a sense that, you're able to address the problem, you're able to address the issue, and you're able to have support. I think a lot of people create the problem by trying to muscle it all on their own and not being able to utilize support. I think if we were meant to do it all on our own, we would be born alone. But there's billions of inhabitants here on the planet, and we're there to coexist, but also to be able to be supported by the right resources at hand. And so we don't have to do this alone. But I think in our world, we're taught that, surrendering is giving up, and it's not. It's starting to address what it is, and it's responsible, and it's a very powerful thing to do. And I know certainly it's why I'm here today. I was having this painful suffocation of losing my physical breath, and I surrendered to the breath of eternity, and that's what saved at least, my life and allowed me to live in a way. And I think that saves so many other lives if they're dealing with addiction or mental health conditions where they're able to not see, it as waving the white flag, but really starting your path to recovery and taking initiation towards a change process, you know.
You talk about superpowers, that everybody has superpowers. And I always say that we have so much more power than we think we have because we're told that we know nothing and yet we know a lot. And I think there's real effort made to kind of keep us stupid, if you will, or thinking we're not very smart. Tell us about our superpowers and how we can tap into that and really get the best out of life.
Yeah, I mean, so much of this world has created our mind and how we see ourselves. And to me, spirituality is tapping into something beyond this world, and it reverses that equation, where your spirit or your mind creates the world that you live in. So instead of having an identity which is shaped on the world from the outside in, the world's projections onto you and all the limitations that they may see yourself, and many people internalize that, you're able to kind of burn that away and see yourself in a lot more of your pure form as someone who's on this earth but not of this earth. And I think really what stops a lot of people is the power of belief and how they see themselves. And the beautiful thing about NDEs or spiritual transformative experiences or even the shakeups of the soul is they kind of force us to surrender to something maybe different than the pain that we're experiencing as a survival skill. We're holding on to so much pain, so we could either continue holding on to it, or we could be changed by surrendering to something else and another way of living and seeing the world. And for the first time, maybe being living while we're living and being aware instead of asleep at the wheel. But the love inside of us, the love around us, is something that we constantly forget. We think we're just alone on this journey, but we all have, spirit guides and higher angels with us. We have so much, you know, uh, force and ammo and beauty that's with us, and we just, it's just so comical, the limiting belief systems that so many of us carry. Just seeing ourselves as our name or our age, it's something limiting because we're not that. We're experiencing that, but that's not the full totality of who we are.
So, what would be your best advice, Jacob, for everybody out there to be able to tap into all those resources that we have, whether it's soul families, spirit guides, loved ones who have left us, angels, spirit itself, where we don't get into a feeling of separation or God is the guy up on the mountain with the white beard? How do we really tap into everything that's available for us, knowing that God in many ways is within?
I think the first step is to be willing to be vulnerable. By vulnerable, I mean that we constantly try to hold on to the reality as we see it, that it's very scary to let go of that and to see life in a different way. So I think in order to really find ourselves, we have to be willing to lose a part of ourselves that we were holding on that's untrue and unhealthy. But the nature of life is we'd rather have an unhealthy comfort zone than a healthy and real comfort zone. So I think being vulnerable is that first step. And once you're able to be vulnerable, we could get into some of these other practices like meditation, which I view meditation as intimacy with eternity. Once you really meditate, you don't have to have an NDE because there's a you beyond the you, a world beyond this world. You just understand there's a timelessness and there's just this part of you that will go on beyond this body. You really are able to tap into the real you, um, in a way. So I think being able to meditate is good, but finding a meditation practice that sticks with you. Some meditation might be a little bit more active than you think. I know I certainly work with clients on movement kind of therapy and just kind of shaking things up in order for those particles, to slow down. But, I think meditation could be helped by the brain. I understood the brain is not the creator of life, but the filter of life. And so the more open the brain is and the more relaxed the brain is, the more that we could be a conduit of the two worlds to be in our life. And those doorways could open more and they could be a part of ourselves and our lives. We have to be aware of it. We have to pay attention to what that doorway is and get a flavor and an understanding of that door.
Okay, last question. A lot of people are afraid, they have fear, and they think there's a hell. Talk to us real quick about fear and hell. I know it's a loaded question. We can go on and on about it.
Yeah. I think hell could be something that we experience here, and heaven is something that we could experience here. But once you cross over, I can assure you from firsthand account and thousands of true NDE accounts, when you're in the other side and you cross over, there is no hell as we see it. Hell is something that we have experienced here, but the idea is to not make that big of a gap between over there and over here. And the more that we're able to remember this and the greater light that we have, the more that this world could be lit and with love, and compassion and awareness, and we could really have, heaven on earth and the hereafter and the here now. That's the goal.
Fantastic. Jacob Cooper, my special guest on Guys Radio. The name of the book is The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. And you know what, folks? We're just two guys. We were talking before the show. We were trying to find a way to talk about sports. And I
Yeah.
was looking for it throughout our conversation. I'm like, I can't just jam in the Jets into this conversation. But I think the takeaway is that we're regular guys, and there's more and more men like us out there who want to talk about this stuff and really want to get in touch with themselves and aren't being preachy or anything else like that about really what is out there and how we can discover who we really are. And there's a lot more to things than what we're being told by the mass media. So just look inside, love yourself. Final words of advice for our listeners and viewers, Jacob?
I would say in line of sports, a good friend of mine, George Mumford, was the secret X factor behind Phil Jackson. And so I know a lot of athletes listening think, okay, meditation, those are for the hippies and stuff like that. Not at all. Michael Jordan meditated, Kobe meditated, the Bulls, the Lakers, Olympic athletes. So, anyone who wants to have a high degree of performance and to really enhance their craft gets into meditation and mindfulness. It's just another gear to really sharpen your ability. So I want to be very clear with that. But I also want to be clear that a lot of what we speak of is something familiar. I don't think people would still be watching to this segment if stuff that we were speaking about didn't hit them in some level. That might come with some resistance because that's a defense kind of thing where all of a sudden, geez, I need to change the way that I'm living and I'd rather hold on to it. So I'll just kind of say this is kind of lunacy or crazy. What I'll say though is there is so much mounting evidence with the afterlife and the hereafter from people who've had near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, evidential mediumship, but there's very little evidence of material reductionism of death, that there's nothing that goes on beyond the body. There's a lot more evidence building every day that there's more than the body. So I think if anything, hopefully people can understand that you may very well be able to bury a body, but you can never bury a soul. Soul will go on beyond the body.
Well stated. Where can everybody find you, Jacob, and get your book?
Yes, so people could find me on my website at jacoblcooper.com, and there I have all my social media handles and my book. My two books, The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder and Life After Breath, are both available primarily through Amazon, although I do sell autographed copies as well, you know, through my
Fantastic.
website.
I love you, man. Thanks for being back on Guys Radio. We'll see you again soon.
An honor. Thank you, Robert. Keep up the
Okay.
great work.
Enjoy the guests and content I bring you each and every week to Guys Radio and Guys TV. Please support us by following and subscribing to our channels. Thank you.